"What do you think of these, manling?" said Gotrek, bending over close to the ground. Ahead of them, the road continued on towards Blutroch and Bogenhafen. Felix leaned on the league marker. This was the edge of the trail. Felix hoped that the innkeeper had returned safely home. "Tracks," he said. "Going north." "Very good, manling. They are coach tracks, and they take the trail north to the Dark Stone Ring." "The black coach," said Felix. "I hope so. What a glorious night. All my prayers are answered. A chance to atone and get revenge on the swine who nearly ran me over." He cackled gleefully. But Felix could sense a change in him. He seemed tense, as if suspecting that his hour of destiny were arriving, and he would meet it badly. He seemed unusually talkative. "A coach? Does this coven consist of noblemen, manling? Is your empire so corrupt?" Felix shook his head. "I don't know. It may have a noble leader. The members are, most likely, local folk. They say the taint of chaos runs deep in these out-of-the-way places." Gotrek shook his head, and, for the first time ever, he looked dismayed. "I could weep for the folly of your people, manling. To be so corrupted that your rulers could sell themselves over to the powers of darkness. That is a terrible thing." "Not all men are so," said Felix angrily. "True, some seek easy power or fleshly pleasure, but they are few. Most people keep the faith. Anyway, the elder races are not so pure. I have heard tales of armies of dwarfs dedicated to the ruinous powers." Gotrek gave a low, angry growl and spat on the ground. Felix gripped the hilt of his sword tighter. He wondered whether he had pushed the Troll Slayer too far. "You are correct," said Gotrek, his voice soft and cold. "We do not lightly talk about such things. We have vowed eternal war against the abominations you mention and their dark masters." "As have my own people. We have our witch hunters and our laws." Gotrek shook his head. "Your people do not understand. They are soft and decadent, and live far from the war. They do not understand the terrible things which gnaw at the roots of the world, and seek to undermine us all. Witch hunts! Ha!" He spat on the ground. "Laws! There is only one way to meet the threat of chaos." He brandished his axe, meaningfully. They trudged through the forest. Overhead, the moons gleamed feverishly. Morsleep had become ever brighter till its green glow stained the sky. Fog had gathered, and the terrain they moved through was bleak and wild. Rocks broke through the tuff like plague spots breaking through the skin of the world. Sometimes, Felix thought he could hear great wings pass overhead, but when he looked up, he could only see the glow in the sky. The fog distorted and spread, so that it looked as though they walked along the bed of some infernal sea. There was a sense of wrongness about this place, he decided. The air tasted foul, and the hairs on the nape of his neck constantly prickled. Back when he had been a boy in Altdorf, he had sat in his father's house and watched the sky grow black with menacing clouds. Then had come the most monstrous storm in living memory. Now, he felt the same sense of anticipation. Mighty forces were gathering close to here, he was certain. He felt like an insect crawling over the body of a giant, but could, at any moment, awake and crush him. Even Gotrek seemed oppressed. He had fallen silent, and had not even mumbled to himself like he usually did. Now and again, he would stop and motion for Felix to stand quiet. Then he would stand and sniff the air. Felix could see his whole body tensed as he strained with every nerve to catch the slightest trace of something. Then, they would move on. Felix's muscles all felt tight with tension. He wished he had not come. Surely, he told himself, my obligation to the dwarf does not mean I must face certain death. Perhaps I can slip away in the mist. He gritted his teeth. He prided himself on being an honourable man, and the debt he owed to the dwarf was real. The dwarf had risked his life to save him. Granted, at the time he had not known Gotrek was seeking certain death, courting it as a man courts a desirable lady. It still left him under an obligation. He remembered the riotous drunken evening in the taverns of the maze, when they had sworn blood brothership, in that curious dwarven rite, and he had agreed to help Gotrek in his quest. Gotrek wished his name remembered, and his deeds recalled. When he had found out that Felix was a poet, he had asked Felix to accompany him. At the time, in the warm glow of beery camaraderie, it had seemed like a splendid idea. The Troll Slayer's doomed quest had struck Felix as an excellent material for an epic poem that would make him famous. Little did I know, he thought, but it will lead to this. Hunting for monsters on Geheimnisnacht. He smiled ironically. It was easy to sing of brave deeds in the taverns and playhalls, where horror was a thing conjured by the words of a skilled craftsman. Out here, though, it was different. His bowels felt loose with fear, and the oppressive atmosphere made him want to run screaming. Still, he controlled himself. This is a fit subject matter for a poem. If only I live to write it. The woods became deeper and more tangled. The trees took the aspect of twisted, uncanny beings. Felix felt as if they watched him. He tried to dismiss the thought as fantasy, but the mist and the ghastly moonlight only stimulated his imagination. He felt as if every pool of shadow contained a monster. Felix looked down on the dwarf. Gotrek's face held a mixture of anticipation and fear. Felix had thought him immune to terror, but now he realised it was not so. A ferocious will drove him to seek his doom. Feeling that his own death might be near at hand, Felix asked a question that he had long been afraid to utter. Herr Trollslayer, what was it you did that you must atone for? What crime drives you to punish yourself? Gotrek looked up at him, then turned his head to gaze off into the night. Felix watched the cable-like muscles of his neck ripple, like serpents, as he did so. If another man asked me that question, I would slaughter him. I make allowances for your youth and ignorance, and the friendship rite we have undergone. It would make me a kinslayer. That is a terrible crime. Such crimes we do not talk about. Felix had not realised the dwarf was so attached to him. Gotrek looked up at him, as if expecting a response. I understand, said Felix. Do you, manling? Do you really? The Trollslayer's voice was as harsh as stones breaking. Felix smiled, ruefully. In that moment, he saw the gap that separated man and dwarf. He would never understand their strange taboos, their obsession with oaths and order and pride. He could not see what would drive the Troll Slayer to carry out his self-imposed death sentence. "Your people are too harsh on themselves," he said. "Yours are too soft," the Troll Slayer replied. They fell into a long silence. Both were startled by a quiet, mad laugh. Felix turned, whipping up his blade into the guard position. Gotrek raised his axe. Out of the mists, something shambled. Once it had been a man, Felix decided. The outline was still there. It was as if some mad god held the creature close to a demonic fire until flesh dripped and ran. Men had left it to set in a new, abhorrent form. "This night we will dance," it said, in a high-pitched voice that held no hint of sanity. "Dance and touch." It reached out gently to Felix and stroked his arm. Felix recoiled in horror as fingers like clumps of maggots rose towards his face. "This night of the stone we will dance and touch and rub." It made as if to embrace him. It smiled, showing short, pointed teeth. Felix stood quietly. He felt like a spectator, distanced from the event that was happening. He pulled back and put the point of his sword against the thing's chest. "Come no closer," he said. The thing smiled. Its mouth seemed to grow wider. It showed more small, sharp teeth. Its lips rolled back till the bottom half of the face seemed all wet, glistening gum, and the jaw sank lower, like that of a snake. It pushed forwards against the sword till beads of blood glistened on its chest. It gave a gurgling, idiotic laugh. "Dance and touch and rub and eat," it said, and with inhuman swiftness it writhed around the sword and leapt for Felix. Swift as it was, the Troll Slayer was swifter. In the mid-leap, his axe caught its neck. The head rolled into the night. A red fountain gushed. "This is not happening," thought Felix. "What was that? A demon?" asked Gotrek. Felix could hear the excitement in his voice. "I think it was once a man," said Felix. "One of the tainted ones, marked by chaos. They are abandoned at birth." "That one spoke your tongue?" "Sometimes the taint does not show until they are older. Relatives think they are sick, and protect them until they make their way into the woods and vanish." "Their kin protect such abominations?" "It happens. We don't talk about it. It's hard to turn your back on people you love, even if they change." The dwarf stared at him disbelievingly, then shook his head. "Too soft," he said. "Too soft."